Shalom, WJC families. It is time to review our Torah talk from Shul this past Shabbat. We read Parshat Bo, the exciting culmination of the plagues, the last three plagues, and the Jews finally getting to leave Egypt, escaping from slavery. And we spoke in Shul this past week about matzah, which figures largely into that story, and we continue to remember this moment in Jewish history through the matzah. I actually started out with a quote from the Shawshank Redemption, a movie you may recall about a prison. There's a point where Morgan Freeman's character is talking about another character, Pops, who gets out of jail and can't handle it, and he says, "These walls are funny. First you hate them, then you get used to them. Enough time passes, you get so you depend on them. That's institutionalized." And I wanted to talk about what it means to be institutionalized to the slaves in Egypt and to us today. So we start off with a quote from the Haggadah. You may recall Rabban Gamliel said there were three things that if you don't mention on Passover, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. The Passover sacrifice, the matzah, and the maror. And we're really only talking about the matzah. So what does it say? The leader of the Seder holds the matzah in their hand and they show it to everyone else. They say, "This matzah that we are eating, what is it for?" It says, "For the sake of commemorating that our ancestors' dough was not yet able to rise before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them, as it is stated." And then a quote from our Parsha, "And they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into matzah cakes, since it did not rise, because they were expelled from Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they made for themselves provisions." So when we talk about this at the Seder, we say, how come they ate matzah? Why were they in such a hurry? And the answer, and I polled the congregation this past Saturday, and the answer was, as I expected, as I knew it would be, because we were afraid the Egyptians might change their mind. Right? The Pharaoh has been fickle up until now. He's changed his minds before, and we were afraid that they were going to come after us. So we had to run. The only problem with that explanation is that here's the context in our Parsha that verse comes from. Starting with Exodus chapter 12, verse 33, so 6 verses ahead of the one that's quoted in our Haggadah, we read, "The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country, for they said, 'We shall all be dead.'" So they were chasing them out. "Get out, get out, we're afraid of you." Does this sound like a people who's about to change their mind? Probably not. It goes on. "So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders." Right? So the dough didn't have time to leaven, not because we were afraid they were going to change their minds. They were pressuring us to get out so quickly. Just go, take your dough that hasn't risen and get out of here. The Israelites had done Moses' bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver and gold and clothing. And the Lord had disposed of Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. Right? So not only are the Egyptians chasing them out, but they're throwing their gold and their silver at them. Here, just take it. It sounds like, someone being held up at gunpoint. And the mugger says, "Give me your wallet." Just take it. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt us. Don't hurt us. Again, sound like a group of people who is likely about to change their minds? No. And then it goes on, "The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 men on foot, and aside from children. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them, some non-Israelites who had joined in with them, and a lot of livestock and flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes." This is the quote from the Haggadah, "that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves." Right? So this is not, according to our text, a sign, this bread, that we were scared and we ran out before we had time for it to rise. It's also, by the way, incorrect to say, well, we weren't prepared. Because just the night before, Moses had told us all about that we were going to leave. Right? Moses had said, we're going to leave. Kill a lamb, put the blood on your doorposts and your lintels, and hey, maybe pack some bread. But we didn't. We didn't. Why didn't we? Maybe we didn't believe that we were going to be leaving. Maybe the Israelites did not believe, despite Moshe's assurances. Why? After seeing all these 10 plagues, or 9 of the 10 plagues, and being told by Moses that they were going to leave, why would they still not pack? Maybe because you get used to the walls, and enough time passes so you depend on them, and that's institutionalized. Maybe the people then were institutionalized. But I'm not so worried about the people of the Bible being institutionalized. I'm more worried about us. Why is it that when we teach this story in the Haggadah, we don't say, we left because we were so strong, and the Egyptians were so afraid of us, we had to run out of there. They were chasing us out like, please, please, just leave. We were so strong that the matzah is the sign of our strength. Maybe it's because of the way Moses describes the matzah a generation later in Deuteronomy. He calls it lechem oni, the bread of poverty, or as we say in our Haggadah, halach ma'anya in Aramaic. This is the bread of poverty, or as we like to say it, this is the bread of affliction. This is symbolic of how weak we are, or we were, how poor we were, not the strength. So even Moshe, one generation later, has already redefined this matzah to be a sign of weakness. And maybe it's because he was part of that generation of slaves. Maybe. Or maybe because because of all the travails and trials that they went through in the desert. But one way or another, Moses, even just one generation later, has already redefined the matzah from a sign of our strength to a sign of our weakness. And it is apparently something we still accept until this day. When it comes to the Haggadah, in his comment on this section on the matzah, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in his commentary on Rabban Gamliel's matzah, he says the Hebrew terminology echoes the description of Lot, who delayed when told to escape from Sodom. God brought it about that the Israelites were cast out by the Egyptians. Had they delayed, they might never have left. Slaves, as Rousseau and Marx said, get used to their chains. Okay, so Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes Marx and Rousseau. I quote the Shawshank Redemption. But the point is the same. The slaves had been institutionalized. They would not have left. So God orchestrates this whole plan so that they would be chased out, because otherwise they might not have left. They were institutionalized. And the thing is, we still look at the matzah as this sign of weakness. We still define it when we read it that we were afraid that the Egyptians might turn and change their mind, no matter how the signs show us that was likely not the case. Why? Because we too have likely been institutionalized. Because thousands of years of persecution and anti-Semitism have left us feeling weak, even when we are strong. Now, we could have a debate about whether or not the Jewish people today are weak or are we strong. I know we feel weak and threatened a lot of the times, but I think you could make an argument that many Jewish people as individuals are very much in control of their lives, very much have the opportunity to have a big impact on other people's lives. I think we live in a country that is strong, militarily strong, economically strong, even if we're at a time when people sometimes feel weak. The state of Israel, even with all of its conflict, I think also can be described as a strong nation. It's stable. It's got a strong military. It's got very few existential threats, immediate existential threats, although we always feel as the Israelis threatened. We're kind of institutionalized also. And the problem with that is the following equation. Strength plus insecurity equals putting people down, and strength plus security equals lifting people up. When we are strong and secure in our feeling of strength, we use that strength to lift people up. That's God's whole point of this Exodus, right? He brings us to Sinai, where we get the Torah, a document that allows us to take the strength of our connection with God and lift up the world to a better ethical way of living. The symbol of strength plus insecurity in the Torah is Pharaoh, right? Who is insecure for no reason, king of the strongest nation in the world, still threatened by the existence of the Jewish people living in Egypt, and enslaves them because of his insecurity. The message, I think, of this matzah is not that we are strong or that we are weak or that it's the bread of affliction or the bread of strength. It's that it is our choice as to how we want to see it and how we want to see us. And depending on how we make that choice, how we view ourselves, will change the way we use our own strength, the way we use our own freedom, the way we use our own ability to change the world. I hope that we will all recognize our strength, even when we sometimes feel threatened, and use whatever strength we have to lift others up. And if we don't feel strong, if we feel weak, we'll recognize where that weakness comes from and do what it takes to build the alliances, to build the connections, to help us feel stronger so that we can fulfill our role as the Jewish people, to bring that morality into the world, to bring those ethics into the world, and ultimately to use it not to raise ourselves up, but to raise up all of humanity and to make this world better for everyone who lives in it. Tikkun olam. That is what we are all about. The matzah should always be a symbol of our willingness and our ability to fulfill that mission of Tikkun Olam. Wish you Shabbat Shalom.